Simply economic. Simply Simply economics. Big ideas made small. Everyday money talk for any mind at all. Simply economics. Learn fast, feel smart. One quick listen and you're ready to start.
Every single morning, millions of people willingly consume a chemical stimulant that biologically induces an anxiety-like state.
A pretty powerful one, too.
Right. And they don't just consume it. They stand in 20-minute lines, they navigate these complex digital apps, and they pay a massive markup for the privilege.
Sometimes like a 400% markup. It's wild.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping right into a really fascinating interdisciplinary text today. It's titled The Behavioral Economy of the Caffeine Ritual.
And it is such a great read because it looks at real-world economics, specifically where the cold, theoretical math of the market just, well, it collides head-on with the messy reality of human psychology.
Yeah, we're exploring the science behind something you probably do every single day, which is your morning coffee ritual.
And you really can't understand the global coffee industry using just traditional supply and demand curves. If you try, you inevitably hit a wall.
Because traditional economics assumes we're robots, basically.
Pretty much. It assumes utility maximization. It assumes that you, as a consumer, act as a perfectly rational calculator, constantly weighing tangible financial costs against tangible physical benefits.
But I want to lay out the ultimate destination for our conversation right at the top, just so you know exactly where this is heading. Consumer choices in the coffee market are driven just as much by our deeply wired human psychology as they are by any kind of cold, rational calculation.
Absolutely. You simply cannot explain the sheer scale, the pricing power, or the absolute resilience of the caffeine economy without understanding the mechanics of the human mind. The text makes it incredibly clear that we have to evaluate this landscape through the lens of behavioral economics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can thoroughly understand how modern cafes operate or why you continually buy what you buy, we have to establish the foundational rules of this specific behavioral economy as outlined in our source.
Right. And the text identifies three core concepts operating here: cognitive bias, habit formation, and perceived utility.
I want to focus heavily on that last one, perceived utility, because it really highlights that tension we were just talking about between classical economics and human behavior.
It's the crux of the whole thing, really.
It is, because if I am being strictly rational and evaluating the tangible benefit, coffee is just hot bean water.
Hot, bitter bean water.
Exactly. The literal rational economic value is essentially the agricultural cost of the roasted beans, the municipal cost of the tap water, and maybe a fraction of a cent for the paper cup.
Yeah, from a purely material standpoint, the objective value is incredibly low.
But the perceived the perceived value to the consumer is massive. It incorporates the warmth of the mug in your hands on a cold morning, or the smell of the roast filling your kitchen.
Oh, that olfactory trigger is huge.
Yeah, or even just the 5 minutes of uninterrupted peace you get before checking your emails, or the social signaling of carrying a specific premium branded cup into your morning meet.
Which people absolutely do on purpose.
For sure. So the gap between the literal value of the hot bean water and the perceived value of the ritual is just a chasm. So looking at those two, does this mean our economic choices around coffee are completely irrational? Like, are we simply failing at basic economics every morning?
What's fascinating here is that the source explicitly argues we aren't being irrational at all.
Wait, really? We're not?
No, we simply need to redefine the economic currency being exchanged. In traditional economics, the transaction is objective price for objective value.
Right, money for goods.
Exactly. But in behavioral economics, psychology acts as a hidden economic currency. The cognitive biases and habit formation mentioned in the text, they work together to create that perceived utility. You are essentially exchanging financial capital for psychological capital.
Wow. Okay, so the baseline assumption of what we are actually purchasing shifts entirely. We aren't buying a beverage, we're buying a neurological outcome.
You are paying to satisfy a deeply ingrained habit loop, because the human brain is a biological machine that constantly seeks to conserve cognitive energy.
It wants to be lazy.
Basically, yeah, habit formation is the brain's way of offloading decision-making. Once a behavior, like the morning coffee run, becomes a habit, It actually moves from the conscious analytical prefrontal cortex into the basal ganglia.
Which is the part that handles automatic behaviors, right?
Exactly. So to interrupt that loop, to actively decide not to get coffee, actually requires more cognitive effort than simply spending the $5.
So you're literally paying to avoid cognitive friction.
Yes. And you are also paying to soothe cognitive biases that convince you a specific cup, made by a specific barista, holds vastly superior value to one made at home.
Even if the beans are the exact same?
Precisely. Paying for that psychological comfort isn't an irrational failure of economics. It's a completely different type of utility that the market has simply learned to price and sell.
The idea that we are fundamentally purchasing psychological comfort sets up a contradiction in the text that is incredibly compelling. Here's where it gets really interesting. The source dives into the science behind coffee anxiety and rituals.
This part is so counterintuitive.
It really is, because caffeine is a powerful central nervous system stimulant. It operates by blocking adenosine, which is the neurotransmitter that makes you feel tired, and it triggers the release of adrenaline and cortisol.
It's chemically inducing a physiological state that mimics the biological markers of anxiety.
Right. You experience an elevated heart rate, heightened alertness, sometimes physical jitters, yet the text explicitly states that the routine around caffeine creates comfort and perceived control.
It presents a fascinating biological and behavioral paradox.
Think about your own morning for a second. You wake up, your alarm pulls you out of sleep. Maybe you are already stressed about a presentation at work or the traffic on your commute.
You're already in a heightened state.
Exactly. You're already stressed, and you instinctively consume a drug that physiologically amps up your nervous system in order to calm yourself down.
It sounds totally backwards when you say it out loud.
It does. I'm trying to wrap my head around the mechanism here. How does the economic ritual of the routine override the very real physiological anxiety caused by the chemical itself?
Well, we have to look closely at the specific phrase the text uses, which is perceived control. In the behavioral economy we are discussing, the ritual itself is a tangible product.
Okay, like a physical good.
Exactly. It's an invisible asset you acquire to manage your mental state. If you consider the baseline state of the modern world, it is overwhelmingly chaotic and unpredictable.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Right. You have very little actual control over your inbox, the macroeconomic news cycle, or the demands your employer places on your time. And that chronic lack of control is a primary driver of psychological stress.
We navigate environments where we are constantly reacting to external forces rather than dictating them.
But you can dictate the exact parameters of your morning coffee.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If you brew it at home, you control grinding the beans, tamping the espresso, the precise temperature and ratio of the water.
Yeah.
If you go to a cafe, you control the highly specific wording of your order.
You step into this little microenvironment where you are the absolute master of the outcome for a 5-minute window.
And neurologically, that predictability is deeply soothing. The brain constantly scans for threats in unpredictable environments. By executing a flawless, predictable ritual, we're essentially signaling to the amygdala that we are safe, that we have mastery over our environment.
So the comfort isn't just a happy byproduct of the coffee.
No, the comfort is the primary driver of the economic exchange. You're purchasing a predictable sequence of events.
And this ritual provides an anchor of certainty that psychologically outweighs the physiological jitters of the caffeine.
Exactly. The perceived control is the actual utility you extract from the transaction. The hot bean water is just the biological delivery mechanism for the psychological routine.
Man, that is wild. But if the routine provides this predictable sequence and this powerful illusion of control, it forces us to look at how that translates into long-term market behavior.
Right, the macro view.
Yeah. The text focuses heavily on why habits and emotions influence repeated consumption. And reading through this section, I kept framing it this way. So what does this all mean?
It's the big question.
When we look at real-world economics, we aren't just making a daily transaction for a beverage. We are essentially putting a subscription fee on an emotion.
I love that analogy.
Because we don't subscribe to a daily apple or a daily glass of tap water, but we willingly pay a premium every single day to feel ready or comforted or in control. We treat our psychological state like a software service that requires daily renewal.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the concept of a subscription fee on an emotion explains a fundamental anomaly in this specific market.
Which anomaly is that?
Well, we discussed habit formation earlier. But a habit alone doesn't explain the sheer resilience of the coffee industry. During economic downturns, rational actors should cut discretionary spending.
Right, you'd think $5 lattes would be the first thing to go.
But they aren't. Coffee sales remain stubbornly high. It is the emotional payoff that cements the habit and allows it to defy standard economic models, specifically the law of diminishing marginal utility.
Oh, right. For the listener who might need a refresher on classical economics, the law of diminishing marginal utility basically dictates that the more you consume of a specific good, the less satisfaction or utility you derive from each additional unit.
The clearest example is food.
Yeah, exactly. The 10th slice of pizza doesn't offer anywhere near the same utility as the first slice. Eventually, the utility drops to zero and demand tapers off naturally. The market finds an equilibrium.
But the caffeine ritual refuses to behave that way.
It really does.
The 1000th cup of coffee provides the exact same anchor of perceived control as the first one. The utility doesn't diminish over time.
Because the chaotic world constantly replenishes your need for that control. You wake up every single day facing a brand new set of unpredictable variables.
Your inbox is full again.
The traffic is bad again. So your baseline need for that emotional anchor resets to zero every single morning.
And that means the emotion and the psychological need for control are doing the heavy lifting for the repeated consumption, not the physical product.
Which explains why people will wait in that 20-minute drive-through line, day after day.
Exactly. That is why the demand curve in this behavioral economy remains so high and so inelastic. You are continually renewing your daily emotional armor against an unpredictable world. The transaction is essentially an emotional coping mechanism priced into your daily budget.
I want to challenge how we are framing this dynamic, though, because we have been analyzing this mostly as an internal consumer-driven process. Like, we crave control, we build a neurological habit, we seek out comfort.
Right, the demand side.
Yeah, but let's flip to the supply side of this equation. Let's look at the cafes and the massive corporations selling us this emotional armor. Are cafes just passively providing a welcoming space for our habits to play out, or are they actively manipulating the cognitive biases we talked about earlier?
Oh, it is definitely not passive.
Because walking into a modern coffee shop, the environment, the pricing tiers, the digital loyalty apps, none of it feels accidental. I imagine they are structuring the architecture of our choices to force our cognitive biases to do the math for them.
The text is exceptionally clear on this point, and it uses very specific language to describe the relationship. Cafes do not passively exist as neutral backdrops for your morning routine.
They're engineered.
Highly engineered. The source explicitly states that cafes use these psychological biases to strengthen demand. It is a highly active, heavily engineered economic strategy.
Give me an example of how they do that.
Well, let's look at pricing architecture through the lens of behavioral economics. Many cafes utilize the decoy effect and anchoring. A cafe might introduce a massively oversized, extremely expensive drink variant on the menu.
Oh, like a super venti $8 monstrosity.
Exactly. And the goal isn't necessarily to sell that specific $8 mega drink, it's to recalibrate my internal sense of what a normal price is.
Wow. So if the massive size is $8, suddenly the $6 medium feels like a rational, conservative, and economical choice.
Precisely. Even though spending $6 on coffee is still fundamentally expensive, my brain is making a relative judgment rather than an absolute one.
Because the human brain struggles to evaluate value in a vacuum, right?
It really does. It naturally relies on the first piece of information offered the anchor to make subsequent judgments. The cafe is deliberately setting the anchor high to increase your overall willingness to pay.
That is so sneaky.
It gets better. Then we have to consider the digital infrastructure, like loyalty programs and mobile order apps.
Oh, the apps. I use mine every day.
Most people do. And these are incredibly sophisticated neuroeconomic tools designed to reduce the friction of spending money by exploiting how the brain processes loss.
Is this that concept of the pain of paying?
That's the one.
Because handing over physical cash literally activates the insula, right? The region of the brain associated with experiencing physical pain and disgust. The brain registers the loss of resources as a negative physiological event.
It hurts to hand over a $20 bill.
It does. But preloading an app with $20 on a Sunday separates the act of paying from the act of consuming on a Tuesday.
Exactly. You successfully bypass the brain's natural loss aversion. When you swipe the app or scan your phone at the counter, it feels entirely disconnected from your bank account.
It feels like I'm playing a game.
Neurologically, it feels like redeeming a reward rather than making a purchase. The pain center remains quiet. This perfectly exploits our bias toward immediate gratification while delaying the perceived cognitive and financial cost. They have removed the psychological friction from the transaction.
And then there is the extreme customization aspect.
Oh, yeah.
The ability to order a half-calf oat milk, 2-pump vanilla latte at exactly 140 degrees that plays directly into that need for perceived control we unpacked earlier.
It's the ultimate illusion of choice.
Yeah, they are providing a tightly controlled sandbox where we get to feel like the absolute master of the outcome, which just reinforces the emotional utility of the ritual.
The environment, the sensory cues, the complex pricing models, the digital payment systems, they're all designed from the ground up to trigger those specific cognitive biases.
It's incredible when you lay it all out like that.
Cafes create a frictionless environment where the absolute easiest, most psychologically comforting choice you can possibly make is to spend your money. This raises an important question about our awareness as consumers in these everyday environments.
Because we think we're fully in charge.
Right. We operate under the assumption that our daily transactions are independent, rational choices, but the architecture of the market is actively guiding our psychology just as much as our wallets.
It really transforms a simple trip to the drive-thru into an immersive experience in applied neuroeconomics.
It really does.
Well, bringing this deep dive full circle back to you, the listener, the ultimate takeaway from the behavioral economy of the caffeine ritual is that your seemingly simple daily coffee habit is actually a wildly complex microeconomy all its own.
A microeconomy built on your own habits.
Yeah, your choices as a consumer in this market are driven equally by powerful psychological forces, the deep-seated need for comfort, the invisible pull of habit formation, and highly engineered cognitive biases, as they are by any rational calculations of price, volume, or physical utility.
The traditional economic ledger simply cannot balance without accounting for the complexities of the human psyche. You cannot understand the transaction without understanding the mind making it.
You literally have to factor in the market value of feeling in control.
Which is pretty high, it turns out.
Very high. So, want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over tomorrow morning while you are waiting in line for your brew. If our demand for something as simple, basic, and ubiquitous as a cup of coffee is so heavily shaped by invisible cognitive biases and a deep underlying psychological need for perceived control rather than pure practical utility, what other supposedly rational daily economic choices in your life are actually just emotional rituals in disguise?
That brings us to the end of today's episode of Simply Economics. We hope this discussion helped make today's economic concept clearer and more relevant to real life. If you found this episode useful, feel free to share it with others who are interested in understanding economics beyond the textbook. You can find Simply Economics on YouTube, Spotify, and Podbean. In our next episode, we'll continue exploring how economic theory applies to everyday decisions and real-world markets. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Simply Economics.